Now, this amazing cover, What Happened to Ruthy Ramirez, dropped just a few weeks ago. It has hit the market by huge storms. People are dying to read it, dying to have her on the show, and we are so lucky to have her here today. Claire, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you. I read this book actually a couple of months ago. I got an early copy and I opened it and I just couldn't put it down. That doesn't happen very often, right? I just couldn't stop reading. It grabbed me from the very first page. So congratulations. I really love it. To people who are not familiar with you, I'm going to read your bio and then we're going to dive into the interview.
Okay.
All right. Claire Jiménez is a Puerto Rican writer who grew up in Brooklyn and Staten Island, New York. She is the author of the short story collection Staten Island Stories, which received the 2019 Hornblower Award for first book from the New York Society Library, was named a finalist for the International Latino Book Awards, a New York Public Library favorite book about New York, and Best Latino Book of 2019 by NBC News. Whew, that's amazing. She received her MFA from Vanderbilt University and is currently pursuing a PhD at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Her fiction, essays, and reviews have appeared in Remsa, Afro-Hispanic Review, Pank, The Rumpus, El Roommate, Eater, District, Lit, The Toast, and the LA Review of Books, among other publications. What Happened to Ruthy Ramirez is her debut novel. Claire, whew, that was amazing. You are so impressive. Tell me, what is this amazing book about?
Well, it's about a 13-year-old girl who goes missing in Staten Island in 1996. And her sisters are watching a reality TV show 12 years later, and they see this woman on TV who looks remarkably similar to Ruthy. And so they set out with their mother eventually to see if this is actually their sister.
It's a beautiful summary. And what I love about your summary and the book is right from the beginning, we don't know what happened to Ruthy Ramirez. Is she alive, right? Or is she dead? Did she run away? Was she taken? And that's really why I kept reading. But at the heart of this is really violence against women. It's a very serious subject. The book very beautifully lays out the layers of complexity around this violence. It shows that it's not simple. It's never just, a quick slap or something that happens out of the blue. It is something that comes from something much deeper. And you address that just beautifully and carefully. And I was wondering, as you sat down to prepare for these interviews, right, and sat down to talk about your book, how do you want the conversation around violence against women to unfold in relation to your book?
Yeah. Oh, man. I hope that it increases the awareness about how women are portrayed in media, especially Black and brown women who are missing. And, it raises awareness about how there's a disparity between the representations of Black and brown women and white missing women, and teaches us to, really pay attention to those stories, that those stories are just as valuable and that we should take seriously their disappearances as well.
Yeah. So I love that. And you actually wrote some of that into the book. I felt like I fed you that answer, that we're like on the same wavelength or something. Because one of the ways that you show all the different sides to this and the different levels are you have each voice has a chapter. So you have several characters who, speak to us throughout the book. And Ruthy has her own chapters. And you start with her in chapter 4, about 50 pages in. And her chapter starts, you write, first of all, if you really want to know what happened to Ruthy Ramirez, then you got to understand what happened that day at school. But maybe people don't really want to know about what happened that day. And maybe they don't really care about what happened to Ruthy either, because most adults already have their own ideas about the type of girl Ruthy is. That is because everybody's always running their mouths about her. And people like that. They're more interested in the type of little girl who one day rides her bike down her suburban block and disappears, only to show up later portrayed by some B actress on Unsolved Mysteries.
Yeah.
And there you go. Can you talk about that opening? That's how you introduce us to Ruthy.
Thank you. Yeah. I wanted to really include her voice inside of this book because I wanted her presence to hang over over the family in the same way that her absence does. And so that the reader gets to see what is this day in the life of this 13-year-old girl, right, in the 90s. And so I really wanted to just capture that 13-year-old voice, that sort of like the rage, but also the tenderness, right? What is it like to be 13 and for your best friend to stop talking to you, and how that can feel so, earth-shattering.
Yeah. But also I loved it because you turned the conversation around. It wasn't, this is what happens to women who are abused. She was saying, ask me.
Yeah.
Don't tell me, ask me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. So how did you think about giving her a voice in this story?
I thought to myself that, so when for those folks who haven't read the book yet, her section starts off with Ruthy really changing perspectives, right? She's trying to figure out how to tell the story, right? Sometimes it's first person, sometimes it's second person, sometimes it's third person, right? And you can see her sort of practicing out how that narration will sit. But inside of that, we also see that, all of the sort of like her really thinking critically about what does it mean to use the second person, right? She says, let's maybe tell the story this way. You're 13 years old, you're a Puerto Rican girl, you live in West Brighton, right? And then later on, she's like, well, maybe you're not 13 years old. Maybe you're not a Puerto Rican girl, right? And so you see that, her really struggling to tell that story. And so when I was thinking about her voice, I really thought that there would be this sort of tension, right? And that there would be this also like this rage, right? But also this defensiveness, but also this like hope that rings throughout. And I knew that those were the elements I really wanted to have.
Yeah. So you mentioned hope. And a lot of times you have scenes in which something happens. There's violence against a woman. Let's say, she's pulled into a bedroom. A little kid is pulled into a bedroom that she doesn't want to be in. And she comes out and she has this moment where she says, do I tell people? Can I go ahead and, pretend this didn't happen? Can I just pretend that nothing happened? And can my life continue? Right? Burying that, hiding it. And I felt like that was something that each of the voices tried to do and experience in their lives. How did you dig into that need to or that question, that moment of, do I hide what just happened?
I thought to myself, I think voice, and I say this a lot, but I say it a lot because I think it's so important and it's so a part of the way in which I crafted this book. I think voice is just as much about silence as it is about what we say, right? And so in thinking about these women and their silences, what do they say instead, right? When they don't have, maybe it's not even not having the language, but feeling too afraid to talk about the things that are in their life, or, but it's this idea that even that sometimes, we use humor to deflect from the issues that are really at play at the core. And so I really think about that in terms of these women's secrets or silences. And I thought about that in terms of crafting each point of view.
Yeah, I loved that. And then you also have the element of the reality TV show, which is a grotesque show called Catfight, right? Which sort of mirrors in many ways what's happening in the real world. And yet there's a lens in front of it because everyone can say, oh, it's just TV. But in fact, right, is it so different? I would love to hear you, like, how did you think about Catfight and how did you come up with that?
Yeah, I was thinking, so Catfight is sort of this weird combination of all of the messed up reality TV I watched in my 20s. And I was like, it's a little bit of Bad Girls Club, a little bit of Survivor, and I wanted to add all of those elements together to create this show that really, brought up issues of representation, brought up issues of stereotypes, brought up issues of, the ways in which Black and brown women's bodies are often used as sites of violence for entertainment. And I thought that echoed well with the idea of the representations of missing Black and brown women in pop culture, right? And I used it sort of to play around with that and that tension of that question, is this really Ruthy, right? Mm-hmm. Is this a real representation of these women, right? Is this really Ruthy? And so letting those two questions sort of tangle with each other.
Yeah. And also you have literally a gaze into violence unfolding in order to gain viewers.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They're not stepping in to stop the fights.
Yeah. 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 And that's it. I mean, it's so interesting. Like I think too about like old Bad Girls Club episodes where you would see the producers come out, right? And they would like chide the woman for, getting into fights. Like, you cannot do this anymore. We're going to have to send you home. But it's like, you created this space, right? And, there's this moment inside the novel where Nina's like, who has choreographed this violence and why can I not stop watching? And I think about those producers, right? Who are like, these women acting this way, but it's like, you set this up.
Yeah. But I felt like this is where you really got into sort of, this book was a master class on craft. Because it was showing,
it's coming from a writer like you. That's very sweet. Thank you so much.
But I really mean it because, right, you have this gaze into people are asking, is it real? What's on the screen? Should I believe it? And at the same time, they're saying, is what's happening to me real?
Yeah.
Should I believe it?
Yeah.
Right? You had that mirror, and I just thought that was brilliant. So was that hard to do? How did you?
It was hard to put all the sections together. Excuse me. My dog was looking outside the window, and when she does that, that's a sign she's going to bark. So I was like, let me close that curtain. But yeah, I was definitely thinking about I think the hard part was crafting all of those point of views together, right? Mm-hmm. It was getting them to match is the wrong word here, but thinking about how they built upon each other, right? What does each character know that the other character doesn't know, right? And how do I stack those sections up upon each other? I think that was definitely the structure and the organization shifted many times.
Yeah. But also, I mean, even the way you slip into the you, right, into second person, the voice changes. And then it felt like I was reading a confessional on a reality TV show.
Yes. Yeah. Right? I love that you caught that. Yeah, that was definitely my intention. Yeah. I wanted it to feel like, especially like, so you even see this with the mother, right? She has this moment, where she not this moment, throughout the whole book, she's talking to God, right? There's this conversation, but which is also like a confessional, right? And then you have Nina's moments where she's thinking about school, and Jess's moments about thinking about as a teenager, right? And I thought to myself, the same way that in reality shows, you go into a booth and you talk to the producers, I was like, these sections can act in this way, right? But I didn't want it to be too heavy-handed, but I want it to be just enough so that, maybe subconsciously the reader would feel that.
Yeah, no, it was perfectly done. Truly. Like, I am not exaggerating when I thought they would say that I thought it was like a master class on craft and, following what I'm reading, right? It was in there. It was clear and not too heavily handed. And then another thing that I loved was there's this, I'm not going to give anything away, no spoilers, okay? But there is a scene for Catfight that happens on a stage. And you write, smiling, the girls on stage ripped off their glow-in-the-dark shirts to reveal bedazzled bras. A thin film of glitter sparkled all over their bare skin, and they looked like a strange combination of both slut and fairy.
Yes.
Oh my God. Right.
Thank you. Yeah, that was such a fun scene to write. Oh my God. I had so much fun with the reality TV shows. And I think what was great about that was it gave relief when there were so many difficult, moments or topics or heavy issues throughout the book. It was great to have fun in those sections. Yeah. I really enjoyed writing the club scene. Yeah.
Yeah. It was it was fun, but also I was so sad. It was really sad. And this juxtaposition, is a woman a slut or a fairy? Mm-hmm. Right? What is she?
Yeah. Yes.
And how did you think about that?
That's so great. It's so great, because you know how it is. As a writer, you sit alone for years. You work on something and you're just like, you spend sometimes hours on a sentence, and sometimes it hits and somebody gets it, but a lot of times it just goes, so it's so great to hear that that it resonated with you in the same way that I had intended it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm so glad that I got it right. And I'm not just making it up. But I wanted to come back to the family itself. So you mentioned briefly there are, several sisters. So there are two sisters and a mother who are left behind when Ruthy disappears. The father dies soon thereafter. And really the book focuses a lot on those family relationships and the roles in the family. I would love to hear you talk to us and tell us a little bit about how you thought about that family and the relationships.
Yeah. So I knew that I wanted to make a book that was centered on women, right? And I wanted it to be this chorus of voices, and I wanted it to be women who, fought with each other, but also fiercely loved each other, right? And that felt true and familiar in my own experiences. So I wanted to, make sure that came through. I think sometimes it's interesting because the responses to the book are a little weird sometimes, but sometimes they'll be like, this family's dysfunctional. And I'm like, well, I don't necessarily think of them as dysfunctional. I think of them as, a family that has gone through stuff, right? And when you go through stuff, it affects you, and it affects the ways in which you talk to each other, right? But that doesn't mean that they don't love each other. That doesn't mean that, they don't, that they won't do anything for each other.
Yeah. I mean, also they rearrange their lives around each other.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. Even though they have secrets, but I think that's true to life. Every family has secrets. You don't know everything that happens, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Okay, so also I wanted to talk about Nina. So she has this amazing college education. She's super smart, but she doesn't get into medical school. Yeah. And again, true to life, right? And showing us this side. There's this one passage where you talk about how she feels about sort of her role in the world. She is hired because they assume she speaks Spanish because of her name.
Uh-huh. That's right.
And so you have this sort of confessional moment where she says, yes, my mom speaks Spanish fluently. My dad did too, but he couldn't read it. My mother was 17 when she started having kids. Sorry, they were so busy working hard. They hadn't had any time to consider the logistics of language acquisition. In fact, my mother did not have the words language acquisition inside of her vocabulary. My parents had no idea that language could disappear. No, I did not want to be assimilated.
Yeah.
Can you talk about Nina not speaking Spanish?
Yeah. It's so interesting because I actually just met with a book club last night of these phenomenal Puerto Rican women and readers. It was moderated by this lovely Puerto Rican critic and, book advocate, Sharon Velez. And we talked a lot about that section, right? Because it's interesting that I think that, often from outsider perspectives, they're like, oh, you're Puerto Rican, you should speak Spanish, all this stuff. But if you grew up in the diaspora, probably you're surrounded more by English than you are by Spanish. And that part really resonated with a lot of the women in the group, and even for Spanish speakers, one woman had mentioned, she was like, I feel the pressure. Like my mother will be like, why don't your kids speak Spanish? And she's like, look, I'm trying my best here. Right. It doesn't always happen right away like that. And so I wanted to talk about that because I think language is really complicated for Puerto Ricans in the diaspora, especially because of the history of colonialism. And there's a lot of shame, right? And there's a lot of silence about language. And I wanted to make sure to include that inside of the book.
Yeah, I loved it because I also thought it contributed some to the sense I had that Nina was lonely. She felt like she didn't quite fit in anywhere. And in fact, maybe each of the characters had a loneliness to them, maybe because of their secrets or how the world saw them. Can you talk about loneliness as one of the themes in the book?
Well, I think Nina, and it's so interesting. Your questions are really echoing some of the ones that I was answering last night. But that loneliness for Nina specifically, you get a scholarship, you go to a PWI, predominantly white institution, you come back, right? And your parents want you to go to school. They want you to do well, right? And then you go back and your sister's like, you think you're so much better than me, right? But then she's at this school where where people literally don't even look at her, talk to her, And there's this real sense of that you're not fitting in either place. And I think that's a loneliness. And I think, for each of these women, and for Ruthy as well, the loneliness of being a 13-year-old girl and having these things which feel so big, but not feeling like you're understood. Right. In each way, these women sort of struggle with that.
Yeah. So I wanted to just go back to this question of, what happened to Ruthy Ramirez. Did you set up the book that way because you wanted it to be hopeful, or like why did you do that?
I think for me, it's that sense of the question, right? Whenever as writers, like you learn to begin with the question almost, right? What is this? What the story sort of spins on that. And for me, that the beginning question was, what if somebody disappeared from your life and you thought you saw them on TV? What would that be? What would you do? Right. And combining those elements. And then I also wanted to think about, of course, the 90s. I wanted to think about New York. I wanted to think about 2008 and Obama's elected, but then the economy has just, crashed and people are unemployed. And so I really was also thinking about like, okay, so if this is a mother who has come to the States to build a home for her daughters, right? And one of her daughters is taken from her. What is that American dream? What is this? And that question of what happened to Ruthy Ramirez, becomes also a question of what has happened to these women in their lives.
I love that. Okay, so I want to shift gears just a little bit and talk about the lead up to publication and publishing in general, because we have a lot of listeners who love to hear from new authors about the process, right? Could you talk about what was the hardest part about getting this book published?
Oh, man. I was lucky because, my agent is really great. And once the novel was done, it was acquired very quickly. It was acquired within a month. But I think the hardest part of getting the novel published was actually the writing of it, was figuring out all of the sections. I'd written a version of this novel that, it's so funny because it's a short novel, but I've literally written so many more, hundreds and hundreds of pages that have not been in the book. You know how it is, right?
Yes.
I have an original version where it goes backwards in time completely, right? Like it starts with the present and then it goes backwards in time. But then the struggle there was, how do you keep that momentum, right? And so I thought to myself, like, okay, so the way to make this work was to sort of hang it, because it had the complication of the rotating multiple perspectives. But if I could hang it on a sort of traditional, like, adventure story, right? Like they go out, right, to go do something, then maybe it could still have that type of energy to push the characters forward. So yeah, that was really, a hard part. I think I don't want to go too long about this, but I think a very real issue too is that, Puerto Rican authors and Puerto Rican characters are not, big in popular culture or in books, and getting people to understand that this family might look different than your family, but they're just as valid and they're just as important. And they may not grieve in the same way that you grieve, but that is legitimate, right? And that's to be respected. I think that also, too, was a challenge, yeah.
Also, I wonder, was it hard? Did people push back because it's about violence against women?
Oh, that's interesting. I think that there was interesting, like, feedback like these women hate each other. And I was like, no, that's not. I mean, in some ways, yes, there's a critique of that, right? Like the in Catfight, for example, right? And I wanted to talk about conflict between women, the reproduction of violence between women, as well as the violence that's enacted upon them, right? And as you've suggested, sometimes those are difficult topics, and they're ugly and uncomfortable topics. And sometimes people really don't want to hear about that, But for me, what's important is to explore what is at the what I'm thinking about and what I'm sort of obsessed with. And so that's what the book became.
So how many years did it take you to write it?
10 years. It took a long time. I mean, originally it was a short story. And then I went to my PhD program. And so really as a novel, it took 5 years, but the idea of it was 10 years old. It was originally a short story.
Wow. I love that you're sharing that because, it is so a beautiful, polished book in the end, but people don't realize that's 10 years of work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just want to emphasize, right? You said that you started with this question, what happened to Ruthy Ramirez, right? And then you use this classic trope of let's send them on an adventure, right? Go out and find them, right? It could be any Greek myth, right? Go out and find something and come home and how have you changed? And yet this story is so unique and so different. So I think that's just, again, a brilliant way to learn about how to write.
Thank you so much.
So also, what kind of advice do you have for new writers or aspiring writers?
Oh, I mean, like, don't give up. It is so hard. Writing is hard. And people don't look at writing as work. And they're always like, get a real job. And it's like, yes, I am working a real job, but I also want to write, and so it's like, I think that, and writers are the only people who get like the rejections, and they're like, but that's a nice rejection. I feel good about that rejection. They liked some of it, and so just be prepared for that, be prepared for rejection, and just, it's okay. You can do it. That's what I would say.
That was amazing that we are the only people who say, but that was a nice rejection.
And like proudly too.
Right. I came really close to a yes.
Yeah, I came really close to a yes. That's exactly right.
Oh my God. So now that you are, the book has been out for a little bit, I would also love to know, have you learned anything from this process?
Oh man. I
should say, have you learned anything that you want to share with us?
Yeah. Oh man, I feel like I've learned that I want to play, right? Just on the page, and I think so, once you've published a book, you've published, various books, 2 books, right? So you've seen like how sometimes when you get into the publication process, it becomes like work almost. And the more professionalized you get, right, it becomes like, this is my career, this is my job, right? And I think that one thing, I also teach at the University of South Carolina, the MFA program. And one of the things I've been talking to them about is like just really getting back to that moment of play, right? And joy, and just, just letting, just going with the character, the simple pleasure of watching a scene work. And that's what I've learned from it. Like, you have to work, you have to make money. Yes. But like, come back always to the page, come back always to the joy of writing.
I love that. Claire Jiménez, thank you so much for joining me today on Check This Out. For those of you listening, her amazing debut, What Happened to Ruthy Ramirez, here again is this beautiful cover. You should go check it out at your local library or buy a copy at your local bookstore. We are so happy to have you today. Thank you, Claire.
I'm so happy to be here. It was a beautiful interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you today to our amazing producers, Megan Coleman and Jared Jenish. They work the magic behind the scenes, and we would not be here without them. Thank you also to the Howe Library Corporation and the Jack and Dorothy Byrne Foundation for their support. Today was the 4th installment of our spring literary series at the Howe Library. And we have one more author coming. May 25th, we have Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenya, whose book Chain Gang All-Stars is launching soon, and he will be on the show. We can't wait to have him. So join us for that on May 25th. And thank you to everyone for signing in. We will see you next time.